All right, it is now the top of the hour, so I want to respect everybody's time. We still have a few folks joining us, but we'll go ahead and get started. Again, hello, and thank you for joining us for our panel today, the Year in Extreme Weather from Coast to Coast. My name is Neil Bennett. I am a Senior Talent Acquisition Partner on the Scripps recruiting team. I'm also a former news director and digital director in several markets in Virginia, South Dakota, Missouri, and Florida. As a self-admitted weather nerd, I'm excited to moderate this conversation about the year in extreme weather from coast to coast, featuring 4 of our top meteorologists. From hurricanes in Florida to wildfires in Montana and Wyoming, this year has been one for the record books in terms of extreme weather. Scripps meteorologists are at the forefront of tracking weather events to keep their communities safe and informed. They're also telling the story of why many of these events are happening and in many cases becoming more extreme. While many of you watching today are Scripps employees or are otherwise familiar with us, let me quickly tell you a bit about the company for those of you that aren't. In our local media division, Scripps owns 61 television stations in 41 markets across the country, 40 of which are local news producing stations. We also own 8 national networks, including Ion Television, which is the 5th highest rated broadcast network. Our 2-year-old sports division has partnerships on the national level with the WNBA and National Women's Soccer League, bringing games to free over-the-air and connected televisions nationwide. Locally, we broadcast 3 National Hockey League teams, including the last 2 Stanley Cup champions, the Florida Panthers and Vegas Golden Knights, along with the Big Sky Conference for college football and basketball. I'd like to introduce you to our amazing panel today. Dennis Phillips, the chief meteorologist at ABC Action News, our station in Tampa, Florida. Aaron Minkowski, meteorologist at WKBW in Buffalo, New York. Amber Sullins is the chief meteorologist at ABC 15 in Phoenix, Arizona. And Ed McIntosh, morning meteorologist at KTVQ in Billings, Montana. After we speak to each of them, we'll open the floor to your questions, which you can post right now or anytime throughout the presentation in the Q&A box. I'll remind you about that about halfway through the presentation. Let's start out in the great state of Florida, which is where I am as well, a state that's been battered by 2 major hurricanes this year. Hurricanes Milton and Helene caused devastation along much of Florida's Gulf Coast. In addition to storm surge and winds of well over 100 miles an hour, tornadoes as strong as EF3 caused billions of dollars in damage throughout the state. As storms were bearing down on the Tampa Bay area, viewers turned to Dennis Phillips to keep them informed and calm. Dennis has been with ABC Action News for 30 years, and during that time, he became very famous for Dennis Phillips's 7 rules of hurricane preparedness. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. But first, let's watch a little bit of Dennis's coverage from this year.
25 miles more to the east of where
Neil, I'm not sure anyone's hearing the sound here.
moving in the direction.
Sorry about that. Apparently, we're having a glitch with the sound. Give me 1 second to see if I can fix that. I don't know, it worked earlier, but here we go. Let's try this again. Sorry about this, folks. Let's start from the beginning.
Some people might say that's my best weathercast ever.
25 miles more to the east of where the NHC has it, probably western Taylor County. But it's simple math on this one, guys. Look at where the center is. It's 160 miles offshore of Pinellas County. If you were to take this to the north, which I did that, by the way, and then I measured it again, it was about 120, 130 miles away. I said, oh, look, it's going into here. Oh, you got to run. Look at, no, it isn't. The track has not changed. The track will not change. This is 6 hours out from landfall. It's simply not going to change. Now, might there be a little wobble here and there? Sure, that's always a possibility. But ultimately, that will not change the path. And by the way, a little something, a little inside baseball, if you will, inside meteorology, I guess. If you look, when you see a storm elongating like this, kind of like an egg, it's doing so because it's moving in the direction the upper level winds are pushing it.
Now, Hurricane Helene can make landfall.
Yeah, we're going to get landfall literally any minute.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much right there. Officially, you get it from the Hurricane Center, and it's going to be in Perry. It's going to be the second straight year that we are going to have a massive hurricane. Last year, I believe it was 130. I think it was Cat 4. It's a massive area from Citrus County all the way down to Sarasota. It's everybody. If you live along the coast, you probably know somebody who's lost much of what they had,
do,
right?
yeah.
And the only thing that I've noticed in years gone by when we have situations like this, and in other parts of the country too, there is a tendency that neighbors kind of come together.
100%.
And, you know, I saw a lot of people today driving cars around and driving golf carts around just looking to help people clean up. Yeah, Wendy, we're about to make landfall. Landfall is about to occur. And, you know, it could not be a better example of how wobbles can go any way and every way. Because over the last 4 or 5 hours, in fact, when it's done, we'll go back and show you, but you had dots going due north, and then all of a sudden, just boom, went right. And instead of going into northern Manatee County or even close to the bay, I suspect landfall is actually going to be around Osprey or Vamo, between Sarasota and Venice, because there is a lot going on. Obviously, we still have 80 to 90 mile-an-hour winds. We still have torrential downpours. We still have catastrophic flooding. I mean, let's continue to focus on folks who need to know what's going on in terms of safety. And we, as I said, again, we still have a flash flood warning in effect for Pinellas County, for Pasco County, for Hillsborough, and for Polk County. And this area right now has seen rainfall way over 12 to 14 inches of rain. I mean, the flooding in itself could be catastrophic. We have not heard a lot of reports. Guys, have you actually heard of any reports of specific areas? About 20.
All right, Dennis. Until this year, the Tampa Bay area has been pretty lucky as far as avoiding direct impacts from hurricanes. Talk a little bit more about how this year was different.
Well, I mean, it dates back to over 100 years. So are you seeing me? Or are you seeing my picture?
We see we're seeing you on the top, and we're seeing your picture as well.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So, because that picture just haunts me when I see that, but that's another story. Anyway, so anyway, it's been 100 years since a major hurricane hit the Bay Area, 1921. And I think a lot of folks who don't live in the Bay Area, it's hard to comprehend. You're right there in the Gulf of Mexico. It appears that you would be in an area that would be very likely to be hit by hurricanes. And we definitely had our share of tropical storms and hurricanes, but none major. And by the way, Neil, you can make the argument that we still have not had a direct impact, landfall, if you will, from a major hurricane. And here's why, and we'll get into that in a second, but you know, Helene stayed over 100 miles offshore. Milton made landfall in Siesta Key, and you did show that clip. I mean, that thing was going north, 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 and it was headed right towards St. Pete. And if anybody's seen the video of Tropicana Field, where it was literally in tatters, I mean, I'll never forget that, because so I'm doing my thing and I'm talking about as this storm is approaching landfall, and we're getting reports of 100, 110 mile-an-hour winds. And the producer goes into my ear, Dennis, toss to Eric Waxler. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to talk to Eric Waxler out in the field, because we have, you know, we've got to talk about these tornado warnings and these 100 mile-an-hour winds impacting the coast. And they're like, no, toss to Eric Waxler. I'm like, all right. So I tossed to Eric Waxler, and the shot, I'll never forget, the shot is him standing there with Tropicana Field in the background in tatters. And I heard the entire newsroom gasp. I mean, I'm over in the, in the studio area, the green wall, and the newsroom is a good 40 feet away. And I just heard a collective gasp because our immediate concern was there were a ton of National Guard and first responders who were being housed in Tropicana Field. And they were sleeping there. There were cots there. So we saw that roof seemingly collapsed and wondering, oh my God, how many people have died from the beams and everything falling? And fortunately, it was not the beams, it was just the tattered, but that was at about 100 to 105 mile an hour winds going on with Milton. But we're also not even mentioning Debbie, which hit earlier in the season. I mean, we got hit 3 times, similar to 2004 when we had Charlie, Jean, and Francis, and literally they did a bullseye right across Polk County east of Lakeland. And Charlie was really the storm prior to. I mean, I think that was the one that everybody from the Bay Area was thinking this was our storm. I mean, 6 hours before landfall, the mayor of Tampa is on our set saying we're going to rebuild because the Hurricane Center 6 hours out had a major hurricane hitting the Bay, Tampa Bay directly. And it did the little right turn last minute and ended up going into Punta Gorda instead. But that was when we had 3 storms. Well, this year we had Debbie, which dumped no surge, but a ton of rainfall about 30 miles south of Tampa, Manatee County. They had 2 feet of rain. There were homes that were not in flood zones that completely were flooded out from the 2 feet of rain that fell in about a 24-hour stretch. So Manatee County, again, 20, 30 miles south of Tampa, got hit by Debbie. But with Helene, that was the storm that hit in the Panhandle, never got closer than 100 miles out. But what was crazy is we had surge greater than we have ever had in the Bay Area from a storm that was still 100 miles offshore. So, I mean, imagine what would have happened if that had gone onshore. And I'm sure a lot of folks have seen the video. I mean, when you're, and that storm did not bring us much wind because, like I said, it was well over 100 miles offshore. Basic math, hurricane winds extended 60 miles out. We're not going to get hurricane winds. And we didn't. But the models were so impressive. And by the way, the Hurricane Center just nailed the forecast for Helene. I mean, within 5 or 10 miles, days out, it was an exceptional forecast. And the slosh models, which predicted the surge, predicted a surge 3 or 4 days out of 8 to 10 feet for us. And people are like, how is that possible? It's not going to hit us. It's going to be 100 miles offshore, but nailed it. So there were warnings, and this was a real tough sell. Because how do you convince people on the coast to evacuate from flooding when they see that storm is not going to be any closer than 100 miles offshore? That is a very tough sell. And unfortunately, some people did not evacuate and they drowned. We had about 12 to 15 folks that drowned right along the coast in Pinellas County because they did not leave and they were not believing. I don't want to say expecting because NHC and the EOC folks could not have been any clearer. 2 days notice, 8 to 10 foot surge, and it happened, but we didn't get a lot of wind. But then Milton came around a few weeks later, and Milton was the wind. But my original point was Milton made landfall in Siesta Key, which is south of Sarasota. You can make the argument that's not the Bay Area. So you can kind of make the argument that we still have not had a direct hit from a major hurricane. Now, Siesta Key, Sarasota, I get it. It's right on the southern fringe of our DMA, but it certainly was not Tampa. But yet, most everybody in the Bay Area had winds of about 90 to 110 miles an hour gusts. Sustained were about 70, 75 to 80. So all the damage that we showed and all the damage that you saw was from a storm that was still 50 or 60 miles south of Tampa, and Helene, a landfalling hurricane that was 100 miles north of us, and yet you still saw the kind of damage that we had.
I know a lot of people have been saying that this was very much fueled by the Gulf of Mexico, which had record water temperatures this year. In August, the surface temperatures hit in the Gulf nearly 90 degrees. How did that supercharge these storms?
It did. I mean, look, the Gulf is warm in the summertime. I've been here 30 years. The Gulf has always been 90 or 91 degrees in the summertime. It just has been. But there are pockets of exceptionally warm water this year that fueled that storm, especially Milton. And fortunately for us, I mean, it was a Cat 5 with 180 for a period of time, and then it started to weaken a little bit. But there's no doubt that all that warm water had a direct impact on how strong those storms got. Absolutely no doubt about that. And I know you're going to get into the conversation later. Does that mean that is a sign of things to come? Look, you look back at this hurricane season, yes, NOAA and Colorado State and all the folks who do the long-range forecasting. I personally am not a fan of long-range forecasting. I think it's a dartboard. I don't think it matters. I don't care how many storms form. All I care about is one's going to hit us or not. And I think if you tell people there's going to be a ton of storms and then there aren't, they're going to think you're crying wolf. And then I think on the other side of the coin, even worse, if you say there aren't going to be many, but one hits you, they might not be as prepared because they said, well, you said there weren't going to be many storms anyway. So I don't think long-range hurricane forecasting does anything, just my opinion. But in terms of this year, think about it. How many storms formed out way in the tropical Atlantic where everything was supposed to go crazy? Hardly any. Why is that? Because the band of Saharan dust that usually is farther in another location was right in the main formation zone. So we did not get very many storms at all coming in from the tropical Atlantic. And that was something that was not forecast, not even close. Yes, there's warm water, but there are so many other variables that come into play when you're talking about where storms form, how strong they form, and it simply isn't just the warm water. Matter of fact, I'd make the argument warm water has very little to do with how many storms form at all. There's a lot more variables out there outside of just how warm the water is. Now, it does have a huge impact on how strong they get. Absolutely, no doubt. But does it have an impact on how many form? There's way bigger fish to fry in that.
So a lot of people have talked about the severity of hurricanes with the warmer water and climate change becoming stronger over the years, regardless of whether we're in an El Nino or a La Nina, which for meteorologists, people who watch weather closely, does affect a lot of the formation of hurricanes. Do you foresee that trending continuing, whether we're in an El Nino or La Nina year?
Yeah, well, I mean, La Nina and El Nino, Dr. Bill Gray passed away years ago. He's the guy who pretty much, from Colorado State, he pioneered the long-range hurricane forecasting back in the mid-'80s. And he is the one who recognized the relationship between El Nino and La Nina, off the coast of South America, and how it impacts hurricane season. Simple as that. So when there's a warming of the waters off of Argentina, it's an El Nino. When there's a cooling of the waters in the Pacific, it's La Nina. And that has a huge impact on location of development. I would argue a far more significant impact. And you can look at last year versus this year as a perfect example. Last year, El Nino, there were no Caribbean storms that formed. Look, in the Bay Area, we look at all the storms. Obviously, they're all somewhat of a threat, but there's no doubt at all. Our biggest threat is a storm that forms in the Southern Caribbean or the Western Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, because they can go right north, shoot the gap between Cuba and the Yucatan and come right into us or into the Panhandle, right? Most storms want to go north. They're drawn to go toward the poles. So 9 times out of 10, if nothing else is going on, a storm in that area is going to go into the Panhandle. But if a trough comes down or a front comes down that kicks it off to the right, it's more likely to go to Central Florida. All right. How many fronts do we get in August or July in Central Florida? Not too many. How many troughs do we get? Not too many. So more than often, you will get a storm that's just going to go into the Panhandle. Whereas later in the season, September and October, you're more likely to get a trough that'll kick it into our area. But clearly, it isn't something that happens all the time, because it had been 100 years since the Bay Area was hit directly by a major hurricane. And I argue that that might even still be the case. But to answer your question, last year we had an El Nino. We had no Caribbean hurricanes, 0, because they all formed in the tropical Atlantic, where they would be more likely to form when the upper level winds are the way that they are, or even lower. This year we didn't have a true La Nina, but we were trending more toward a La Nina, and we had far more southern and southwestern Caribbean storms. And that's why, now, if you remember, Milton actually cut across from the Pacific and went into the Gulf and then went across. But, 9 times out of 10, For our area, it is those southwestern Caribbean and those southern Caribbean and western Caribbean, you know, from Belize to, you know, even south of Cozumel, down in that area. When those storms form, there's all that warm water. And if they go north and it's October or September and they run into a trough, they're going to hit Florida. They're going to hit Florida somewhere, whether it's Fort Myers or up to the Panhandle.
So finally, talk about your 7 rules, which was inspired merchandise, menu items, and restaurants. Talk a little bit about that.
It's kind of a crazy thing. So back in 2012, Hurricane Isaac was coming our way, and the RNC, the Republican National Convention, was in Tampa, right? And so this storm is coming, and they're literally talking about moving the RNC to Jacksonville because we were going to get a hurricane. So everybody was freaking out about it. And I'm like, no, guys, it's going to be far enough offshore that we're going to be okay. And I just jotted down these rules. Don't freak out unless I'm freaking out. We're fine. And I was talking about Hurricane Isaac. I had no intent of it turning into this thing, but it's kind of morphed over the years. And this was back in 2012, so that was 12 years ago. It's kind of morphed over the years that it makes sense even if a storm is going to impact you. Because how in the world are you going to make an educated decision to keep your family safe if you're freaking out? You got to keep your head screwed on straight. You got to make those decisions and do so in a way where you're not so freaking out and to help your family stay safe. And it's kind of morphed into that mindset. Now, yeah, there are some people who wait. If I post on social, on Facebook, and I don't say rule number 7 after the end of what I'm talking about, they think that means it's time to freak out and we're going to get a big storm. And so I have to remember these things. And it's crazy how social media has really, you know, blown up in these kind of situations. I mean, prior to Helene, I had 600,000 followers on Facebook. Now I have 1.25 million just after Helene and Milton. So, I mean, we all know that people are turning to social media in addition to broadcast, in addition to streaming, to get their information. And I think obviously the successful stations and groups are the ones who figured out a way to use all of the above to get that information across. But yeah, the merchandising and whatnot, it just kind of turned into a thing. A local brewery that made a beer, rule number 7, with suspenders on the can and donated the proceeds to the Red Cross. Our family has merchandise on Etsy and whatnot, and we've raised tens of thousands of dollars that we've donated to the Children's Miracle Network and All Children's Hospital and Feeding Tampa Bay. So it's kind of turned into a community thing, but I don't know, Neil. I think a lot of folks are like, no, you know what? I'm done with this for a while. Let's have a cold front or two and maybe have a chance to recover and start over again next June. So, but that's how it started way back in 2012.
Absolutely. Well, stay with us, Dennis. We've got a few questions that have already popped in for you. And as a reminder, you can pop your questions in for any of our meteorologists in the Q&A box. So we're going to move out to the Southwest, where Amber Sullins is the chief meteorologist at ABC 15 in Phoenix. She's been talking to viewers about climate change in Arizona for over a decade now, with the main focus being on heat, drought, and wildfires. Under Amber's leadership, ABC 15 was one of the first local television stations in the country to start a climate change reporting team. The Impact Earth reports air weekly from meteorologists and reporters, highlighting the challenges Arizonans face as the climate changes, as well as adaptation and solutions to combating the negative impacts. Let's watch a bit of Amber's reporting from just a couple of months ago.
Meantime, turning now to our extreme heat, Phoenix topped 110 degrees for the 56th time this year. Amber, that's a record.
Yeah, 56 days now, and we're going to be adding to that tomorrow. We broke other records today as well, including the daily high record of 115 degrees. We topped out at 116. This is the latest in the year it has ever been this hot, and 116 is also tied for the hottest September day ever recorded, but that tie goes with September 1st. So this, again, is the latest it's ever been this hot in Phoenix. 115-degree days, unfortunately, are becoming more and more common here in the Phoenix metro area. I pulled the numbers for you tonight. I've broken it down into 20-year periods so that you can see the trend dating all the way back to 1900. Prior to the 1960s, in each 20-year period, we got about 7 of these days. And then our climate started to change, and change fairly rapidly here. We are now less than 5 years into the most recent 20-year period, which will take us from 2020 to 2039, and we're already at 55 days. So in less than 5 years, we broke what we saw in the 2000 to 2019 period, that number of 42 days. And we're just going to keep on climbing. You project this out, by the time this 20-year period is over, we may be at over 200, a massive increase as we look at how this breaks down by 20-year periods. But I want to show you future projections. Climate Central tonight showing us the numbers that we could see in the future. On average, we tend to see only about 2 days a year at 115 or hotter. This year, we're already at 11. By 2050, that average could be close to 20. By 2075, maybe close to 30. After that, the future really depends on us and how much globally we could cut carbon dioxide emissions in our atmosphere. Greenhouse gas warming could take us up to maybe 40 of these days by 2100, or perhaps as high as 60. Again, the future all depends on how much CO2 we can get out of the atmosphere in the decades to come.
That's very concerning, Amber. Thank you. Still ahead, though, we're taking a closer look. Meantime,
Amber, tell us a bit about how this year was different for the people of Arizona with just the record number of extremely hot days.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible. We had 70 days total at 110 or hotter. So that was a new all-time record. It broke the record that we just set last year of 55. So we took last year's record, we beat it by 2 weeks. Last year's record beat the 2020 record by 3 weeks. So we're really just amping up the heat like crazy around here. You know, in that clip that you showed, we broke down the 115 degree plus days, but we're seeing similar numbers in terms of our overnight lows as well. And that is really climate change and the rapid expansion of our urban heat islands. So those overnight lows are impacted by both of those aspects, and the number of 90-degree lows is really increasing as well. So we're not even cooling off like we used to. Of course, Phoenix is known for being a hot place. I was born and raised here. It was hot when I was growing up, but we were still, even on our hottest days, still getting down into the upper 70s to low 80s in the overnight hours. And now we're doing months at a time where the overnight low doesn't drop below 90 degrees. So we're really ramping up the records. That clip you saw, 116 in September, we actually later in the month got up to 117 degrees toward the end of September. And then we did a 113 degree day in October. So the heat is lasting longer throughout the year. And even this December is probably going to be the warmest December ever recorded in Phoenix. We're going back up into the 80s for the middle to end of the week. Going to break daily records and probably see one of the warmest Decembers on record in terms of the overall average temperature, but also the warmest in terms of how many days we've had this month where temperatures have been in the 80s. So not a lot of relief. And of course, you know, I don't need to harp on it too much, but you know, heat is the #1 weather-related killer, more than hurricanes, more than winter storms, more than anything. And the numbers in Maricopa County alone this summer and last summer, Maricopa County is the county that the Phoenix metro area is in, we're at over 500 heat-related deaths in just the Phoenix metro area this summer and last summer. So we're starting to keep more detailed records on how many people are dying due to the heat here in Phoenix.
Well, Chad Merrill just popped a question into the chat, which I was actually going to basically ask the exact same question. So talk about the impact that this extreme heat has on things like water supply, power reliability, and costs in Arizona. Has that been something you or the station have been reporting on?
Yes. So the costs are out of control, right? In terms of your electric bills, because you're running the air conditioning 24 hours a day. Having said that, Arizona in general does tend to have lower utility rates than other states, but we're still, you know, regular homeowners with a house anywhere from like 2,000 to 3,000 square feet are easily paying $600–700 a month just keeping the AC going in the summer months. So yes. However, the other thing that really gets into all this is during the hottest time of the year is also when we have our monsoon season. So the winds will shift, they'll bring in moisture, and storms will form. Daily thunderstorms will form in the higher terrain, and oftentimes those move down into the valley. And so that's also when we get our highest number of power outages during the monsoon season. So it'll be, 110 degrees in the day. A storm will come in maybe 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, knock the power out for a few hours. At that point, we're still in the 90s, if not low 100s, because oftentimes on our hottest summer days, we're still right around 100 degrees at 10 o'clock at night. So the good news is that power outages here don't last very long. In fact, I pulled some stats on this recently because I was curious too. And between the year 2000 and 2023, there were only about 6 power outages that were considered major power outages affecting 50,000 people or more. So our grid is fairly reliable. It's just that we need to use it more. And Phoenix and Maricopa County specifically is really one of the fastest growing areas in the country. So we're really going to have to increase the size of the grid in the coming years in order to really accommodate for all of the new people that are moving here as well.
As we saw, you speak openly and honestly about climate change and its impact on the weather there in Arizona. That topic can be politically charged and controversial for some. How has the audience responded to your reporting about climate change?
I mean, the thing about the way that we talk about it is, there's no denying that Phoenix is getting hotter. We are all like in survival mode with these 110, 115 degree days. So I don't need to convince anyone that our climate is changing in Phoenix. Where it gets dicey is the part that I stay out of, which is the policy side. What do we need to do to fix it? I tend to not go there because that's where it gets political. But we just do our best to report on how the heat is impacting people, everything from, like we talked about, the power reliability, we have reporters reporting on the cost of electric bills and the programs that they could use to kind of help subsidize or, get some of that taken care of. SRP and APS, our 2 biggest utility providers, have programs now where if you can't pay your bill, then they will, basically give you a loan on that and you can make payments later down the road, because we got to keep the AECs running to keep people alive here in Arizona. So, I mean, that's really the gist of it. Heat is the #1 thing we're talking about. We're also talking about drought. And I didn't touch on this last time with the last question, Neil, so I'll just say the heat is impacting our water supply. And we do a lot of water reporting, especially when it comes to our supply down the Colorado River. About 35% of Arizona's water supply comes from the Colorado River. And the Colorado River reservoirs that we pull from, Lake Powell and Lake Mead, have been riding right around 30 to 40% recently. So the water supply thing is huge, and the temperatures play a big part in that, because the warmer the air is, the more evaporation we get off of the Colorado River. So even if we have a good snowpack year in Colorado, if it is melting and coming down the Colorado River system when temperatures are extremely warm in those spring months, we'll get more evaporation off of that river, and we won't realize as much actual water downstream as we would have otherwise. So that's a big issue for us as well.
All right, well, stick with us, Amber. There's already some questions popping into the chat. We'll get back to you in just a couple minutes. Again, a reminder, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box, and we'll start answering them at the end of the presentation. So let's head north now, where massive wildfires scorched hundreds of thousands of acres in Montana and Wyoming in 2024. This comes on the heels of record losses from wildfires in California and other states this decade. Ed McIntosh of our station KTVQ in Billings has led the meteorological side of wildfire coverage for the station. He started his career in weather, of all things, as a radio disc jockey. He was asked to host a parade on TV, which led to a weekend weather job when Ed decided to go back to school and study meteorology. Ed's been at KTVQ for nearly 15 years and has been a meteorologist for more than 30 years. He and his wife, Sandy, were born and raised in Montana, where they've also raised 3 daughters. Let's take a look at some of the work him and his colleagues at KTVQ have done this year covering the wildfires.
This is the MTN 10 o'clock news.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday night. I'm Casey Conlon. We're into night 12 of the Elk Fire as firefighters continue to make progress on the blaze burning in Sheridan County, Wyoming. It grew around 1,000 acres overnight last night, bringing the total footprint to about 76,000. Crews have been able to construct more fire lines. The blaze now 16% contained, almost entirely along the northeast side. Many remain on evacuation notice. Nearly 900 personnel continue to battle the fire.
It's a scary scene for many in southern Montana.
If it had kept going and if the guys hadn't been back burning, Bernie itself as a town would not be there.
The Remington fire first began in Wyoming but quickly spread to Montana, affecting Rosebud, Powder River, and Bighorn counties. As of Saturday, the fire has grown to over 184,000 acres.
It's kind of a regular thing. I mean, every year we have at least 1 to 2 big giant fires that kind of spooks everybody. For the years that I've lived here, this is probably the worst one that I've seen.
The heat was so enormous that it blistered my knees, and my right hand has blisters on it, and my ear. And to me, it was a close to death experience.
Here's a look at visible satellite showing us there. You can see the areas of smoke here and how it's pushing out, affecting air quality. Dayton over towards Sheridan and all the way down towards Buffalo, much of Wyoming, and the area that's now being engulfed in all that fire starting to move a little bit closer towards Parkman and Dayton.
The biggest weather story is obviously the haze and smoke. We still have a lot more on the Sheridan area, and now that the sun has set, a lot of that smoke is settling down toward the ground, so the air quality has gotten worse the last couple of hours around Sheridan, but many areas in the moderate category, including Broadus, Miles City, Billings, all the way to Lewistown, and closer to Glendive, too. Now, we're still expecting more of that smoke around the Sheridan area specifically.
The weather here in Sheridan County is much different than it's been for the weeks of trying to fight the elk fire, and residents tell me the rain is a nice relief.
A peaceful sound, bringing some hope with it.
This morning, my whole place is saturated with water already, so I know it's saved now.
That's the key word, saved, for locals like Jack Russell and Keith Reichert.
The rain and the forecasted snow has just been a blessing to have.
This is
Ed, go ahead and talk to us a little bit more about the difficulty of forecasting wildfires, especially in an area that's as large as your viewing area, which encompasses so many remote areas in Montana and Wyoming.
Yeah, well, first out, the DMA for us, our viewing area, is roughly about the size of Pennsylvania. So even when we're talking about these huge areas with fires that could be tens of thousands of acres, we're still talking about a small portion of the area that we're going to be covering. So it's trying to find that balance a bit between those areas where the fires are developing and then trying to talk about the weather for the rest of that area as well, where you're looking at that threat of fires continuing to develop. That could happen anytime. During this last year, we had 110 days between our first fire that we started to cover as a news team and the end of the largest fires that actually occurred much later in the season than we would normally see. But your question too, you said, you asked me about forecasting wildfires, and different than the other things we're talking about, hurricanes and the heat and the snow that we're going to talk about as well. We're not really forecasting the fires, we're forecasting the conditions that can lead to those fires. Heat, wind, dry conditions, the potential of those fires developing because of the fuel starting to dry out. So it's a difficult situation in that we can talk day to day about the circumstances being right for fires to develop, but forecasting when they're going to happen, that's going to be something else altogether, because we also have the human element involved in that, where some of the wildfires are started by people. And then we had quite a few this year that were actually natural started fires. And in many cases, they could start smolder for a few days. And then as the winds kick up or something else happens with the weather, then it develops into the fire. So we may not have even seen it come from that point of view. So it's a little different situation in terms of forecast, because we can only talk about the circumstances being right for fires to develop.
And you grew up in Montana, you've covered the weather there for a long time. Have conditions changed at all over the last several years that made wildfires either happen more often or more likely to spread more quickly?
Yeah, if we would have had this conversation a couple of years ago, we would have been talking about floods. We had 500-year floods that wiped out roads, that limited access into Yellowstone National Park. So year to year, we can see the extremes change depending on what it is that we might be talking about. Could be seasons when we have an excessive amount of wind, and we're dealing with some of that here in the next couple of days, hail, flooding, or in certain years, then it develops into the wildfire situation. So it tends to be longer term situations that will develop through the season, and we can see those change from season to season, but it isn't consistently a wildfire situation. We actually had a fairly quiet year last year.
Montana's growing rapidly with people moving from other Western states. How's that changed the way you deliver your forecasts?
I think part of it is we had an influx of people that started to move in, especially right around COVID. And so the population started to increase that way. And I think a lot of folks, they saw, they were watching Yellowstone and, they're riding around on the horses and everything looked beautiful. And as I watched that show, I thought, it's never snowing. But in reality, our weather is made up a lot of extremes. From days when we expect to have a season where we're going to have 100-degree plus temperatures for a stretch, and we expect in the wintertime that we're going to be looking at extreme cold, sub-zero readings for a stretch of time as well. So I think part of it was trying to get people used to the idea, number one, that the weather's made up of extremes and to be prepared for it, and number two, that they're moving into a highly rural area. And so we still have stretches of road where sometimes the cell phone coverage isn't quite so good. So there are having people be prepared if they're going to be traveling, if they're going to be doing things, that the weather extremes are going to be more typical than what we would normally think of as the norms.
All right, Ed, stay with us. We'll get back to you in just a minute with some of our Q&A questions. Finally, let's go out to Buffalo, where the most recent of the extreme weather events we're talking about was an intense band of lake effect snow that stretched from northern Ohio to western New York in late November. Many of us were watching that Buffalo Bills game not too long ago that looked like it was in a snow globe that hit Orchard Park, where the Bills play. The area's been hit hard recently by major snow events. Aaron Menkowski is the chief meteorologist at WKBW in Buffalo. He's been a meteorologist in Buffalo since March of 2000. Along with his on-air duties, Aaron serves as an expert witness for weather-related court cases and has taught a college course on severe and unusual weather at Buffalo State. Let's watch some of his work from just a couple of weeks ago.
Up south of Buffalo. Here are some numbers, and I'm just looking. The new numbers just came out from the Weather Service. Cassadaga leading the snow total numbers with 31.6 inches, but Mayville at 30 inches of snow. That's in Chautauqua County. In Cattaraugus County, the town of Cattaraugus, 29 inches. Perrysburg, almost 2 feet of snow. South Dayton, about 21 inches of snowfall. And then in Erie County, the highest total we're seeing so far, Springville at 19 inches of snow. And of course, those numbers are going to go up as we head into today, tonight, tomorrow, and even Monday, as this is a long-lasting event. There is that lake effect snow band right now, getting itself better organized. It did weaken a bit overnight, and then as the morning's moving along, it is starting to strengthen again. The northern edge of the band has now hopped over 20A, pushing up toward Hamburg, a couple of flakes in South Buffalo and Lackawanna, Orchard Park, Elma, over toward Attica. And then the southern edge of the band from, say, Westfield toward Casadega, moving over toward Otto. Along the 219, travel will be very difficult across southern Erie County, along 16 in Holland, Evans, Eden, Boston, Holland. That snow is really going to pile up. Here's the model showing the snow band pushing up toward Buffalo this afternoon, especially South Buffalo. The heaviest snows just across the South towns later today and into tonight. And the snow amounts into northwestern Wyoming County and southwestern Genesee County. As the evening moves along, then the band starts to push further southward. The heavier snows again for Hamburg, East Aurora, and Holland. The band does weaken a bit on Sundays. We're talking light snow in Orchard Park Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening for the game as that band continues to shift further southward. We are going to talk about feet of snow on top of the feet of snow that you already have in some spots. Here are snow totals on top of what's already on the ground along the Chautauqua Ridge. Another couple feet of snow. Same thing with places like Springville, stretching up toward Holland. You're in that 12 to 24 inch range. Look at the sharp cutoff, though, as you get up toward Buffalo, over toward Batavia. I know it's a wide range of snow totals, but anywhere from 2 to 12 inches. Say the metro area where we are could see a couple of inches, but South Buffalo could see a foot or more. And you'll get higher amounts for places like East Aurora, Holland, Hamburg, and Orchard Park. Cheektowaga, you're right on that northern edge. You'll see a little bit of snowfall. Southern parts of Cheektowaga could see a lot more.
Aaron, lake effect snow, of course, is a known issue in Western New York.
Yeah.
But it seems from an outsider like the impact of these storms is greater recently. From where you sit, are you seeing anything different?
Last season we only had 5 lake effect snow events. Normally we get 10 a year. I think you see them when they impact the Bills games. Last year we had one real big event, and that was right in the middle of January. It ended up moving that Pittsburgh Steelers Bills playoff game. So the networks love when the snow is coming down in Orchard Park, and then you can see the Josh Allen playing in snow. So really, we only had 5 on average. We have 10, so we had 5 last year. I've already had about 3 this year. Lake Erie wide open, but that tends to be the case. Late November through December is when lake effect snow does peak here in Western New York.
How difficult is it to forecast like the precise impact of these types of storms? Where someplace like Orchard Park, where the Bills play, sees feet of snow, where downtown Buffalo gets next to nothing, just a short drive away. How difficult is that?
It's extremely difficult because, like you mentioned, Orchard Park is about 10, 12 miles south of Buffalo. They picked up some spots 3 to 4 feet of snow in this last event where downtown Buffalo really got a dusting. South Buffalo had more than a foot of snow, and all the schools were canceled in Buffalo because South Buffalo had streets that you couldn't pass, where downtown in North Buffalo, it was sunny. So you've got that line where that band will be on the northern edge of it. There'll be a huge difference, even from town to town. Cheektowaga, where the airport is, North Cheektowaga, where the airport is, may not have much snow. Southern parts of that area could see feet of snow. So a mile or two will make a huge difference in snow totals across the area. So, a general, hey, central and southern Erie County, you'll have a lot of snowfall. However, that northern edge where the band will be, that's what makes it extremely difficult. That's why a lot of, the network folks, when they come in for the Bills games, they stay downtown and then they head out and drive to Orchard Park, which is south of Buffalo. And it goes from, where you can see the grass to literally feet of snow.
So when you speak to the weather service there or other meteorologists or other climate experts, what is there a concern? Amber talked about heat, extreme heat. Dennis talked about the sea surface temperatures. Is there like an area of bigger concern for your area right now?
You know what? I think Dennis also spoke about El Nino and La Nina. That's what we're more concerned about. I mean, we have the lakes, kind of like Dennis also mentioned. We always are going to get snow. In 2022, we had another blizzard, but we've had a number of blizzards, the biggest one being in 1977. So our concern is kind of El Nino, La Nina, and last year we had the El Nino, and we had a pretty relatively mild winter. This year, we're kind of waiting for the transition from El Nino to La Nina, and that should produce a little more snow. We thought we'd have a more active December, and we certainly have had that so far. And so that's kind of what we look at. Really, the only thing I've, speaking to other people is that our growing season is a little longer now than, say, over the last 60 years, that has increased a bit.
All right, Aaron, thank you so much. We'll get back to you with some questions. Again, if you have questions for our meteorologist, please pop them into the chat, and we're going to go ahead and start taking some of your questions right now. Let's start with a question for Dennis, and I'm actually from Paul Kratz, and I'm going to take the second half of his questions. What, if anything, do you feel like contributed to the accuracy of the NHC forecasts for those storms this year? You were talking about how they were within 5 or 10 miles on the landfall of Helene. What do you think made their forecast that much stronger this year?
I mean, science, technology, computer power. A lot of times the accuracy of the models all boils down to how much money is spent for the computers, for the information to make the forecast accurate. I mean, I remember back with Sandy. Remember the superstorm Sandy? And the Hurricane Center had talked about the fact, as did NOAA, that there had never been so much data gathered prior to the storm and able to put into the computers to make the forecast more accurate. I mean, look, weather is chaotic. I don't believe we're ever going to get it right all the time. I don't think anyone else thinks that either. But the more information we have, the more supercomputers we have, the more data that we're actually putting into there's an expression, garbage in, garbage out. And when you're talking about long range forecasting, whether it's hurricanes or snow events, I don't know, listening to Aaron, I will tell you personally, in my opinion, I think forecasting lake effect snow and the specifics are way harder than forecasting where a hurricane's going to go. I mean, look, 3, 4, 5 days out, the margin of error is several hundred miles. I mean, you're talking about Florida, that's the Atlantic or the Gulf. So at some point, we're going to get a little bit better. The Euro AI did an amazing job this year in forecasting. And if you're not familiar with what that is and how it's done, it's kind of a cool concept. And it's one that I actually agree with just based on its philosophy. So what they did is they've taken data, whoever they are with the Euro, they took the data from the last 85 years and just threw it in, everything that they could come up with data-wise, weather-wise, and threw it into the computer. Now, we have something that we call analogs, and we take a current situation, the state of the atmosphere right then, and we compare it to maybe another period of time. Now, usually it's a long range forecasting, maybe over a couple of weeks or a month. And we try to find a similar situation. We're like, okay, well, this happened back then. Maybe it's going to happen like that now. The accuracy is not bad. But this year, the Euro AI took that and took all that data and compared it to what was happening right now. And I believe it by far had the best performance of any of the models out there during this last hurricane season. So there's something to be said. Oh, look, it happened before. The ingredients are very similar. It could happen again. But in terms of the accuracy for this particular year, that was one of the reasons. But I still say it all boils down to this. The more money that you put into the models, the more money that goes into the computers, you're going to get a better end result as the science increases its accuracy.
So this question is for Aaron. It actually comes from another of our Scripps meteorologists, Geneva Zoltek, out in Las Vegas. How is the receding ice coverage on the ice cover on the Great Lakes impacting the weather?
Well, yeah, once Lake Erie is iced over, it certainly impacts our amount of lake effect snow. You'll still get a little lake effect snow with convergence through that ice, but Lake Erie being the most shallow one, it does tend to still freeze over. Obviously, last winter it did not, but yeah, the longer the lakes do stay open, the better chance we have lake effect snow. So once they do ice over, which tends to occur late January into early February, it shuts off most of our lake effect snow, but never completely. And yeah, so if we were to have less ice, then we would have more storms.
So this one is for Amber, and you touched a little bit about the drought and the water supply in Phoenix earlier on. At what point does Phoenix decide to impose water restrictions? This is from Chad.
Okay, so we have water supply coming into the Phoenix metro area from two different areas. We have it coming in from the Colorado River, and that actually gets pumped through the Phoenix metro area and down south of Phoenix into agriculture land down there across what's known as Pinal County. So the farmers in Pinal County have already had to take a cut because the Colorado River is in a tier 1 shortage. And we, as junior water rights members of that treaty of the 5 states that share the Colorado River water, take first cuts. So farmers in Pinal County have already been cut about 500,000 acre feet. Now that happened last year. So we've already seen some changes there in terms of what they can grow. Now, as far as the Phoenix metro area itself, we have the majority of our water supply coming in from the Salt and Verde River systems, which are located north and east of the Phoenix metro area. And that comes down and it gets stored underground. So the city of Phoenix itself has a 100-year supply of water for residents and businesses underground. So at this point, we do not anticipate seeing water cuts for any residents here in the Phoenix area anytime soon. But that Colorado River water that goes down to the farmers, there could be more cuts to that in the years ahead. And that's really the biggest impact that we're seeing right now.
All right, this one is for Ed, from Chad Merrill, who's I believe a meteorologist in West Virginia. His DMA in southern West Virginia has seen its share of brush fires during the fall season. How important has it been to follow atmospheric profile changes to forecast smoke plumes, more fire ignition, and air quality concerns?
Oh, that's a really great question. Especially with air quality, that tends to be one of the biggest issues that we have to deal with. And it's generally not from local fires. We had a number this year that were close enough that did have some influence, but through most of the season, we're talking about fires that are in Idaho, Oregon, Northern California, Canadian wildfires to a good extent that are affecting our air quality. So we'll be spending a lot of time
think we just lost Ed. Oh, well, sorry. Hopefully he pops back on here in a second. Real quick one for Dennis Phillips. Looking towards 2025, are they expecting an El Nino or La Nina year next year?
Last I checked, more of neutral. In other words, it isn't just, Mother Nature flips the switch and we go, oh, we're in La Nina or El Nino. It's just a warming and cooling of water. It's all it is. So the water doesn't go from warm to cold instantly, right? It has to go through the process of cooling or warming. And right now we are going into a La Nina. Although I'll tell you, the forecast of a La Nina, which was supposed to be pretty solid by October, just never really happened. I mean, we certainly were leaning more a little bit. So imagine you're at an El Nino, you're at a neutral, and then you're at a La Nina, right? Where it's cooler. So we were kind of a little bit closer to the La Nina, not really into it. And the long range so the fact that 2 months out, the forecast wasn't really all that great. Again, you kind of already know my take on long range forecasting as it is. I think it's just not great. But by next summer, yeah, I mean, what I've been seeing is that we're going to be more neutral, probably leaning still a little bit more toward the La Nina, which is kind of where we were this year as well, at least for the Caribbean. And again, I'll say it again, a La Nina situation in the Caribbean is probably one we do not want to see in the Tampa Bay area, because it almost always lends to more development in the Caribbean. Doesn't mean it's going to come to us, Florida, but usually it does. If you're September, October, the majority of the time, a storm that develops in the Western Caribbean is going to end up in Florida, especially when it's late September into October, because you're going to have a front come through, and those fronts will funnel it right into Florida.
All right, well, I want to thank all of our meteorologists who were part of the panel. Real quickly, I want to turn this over real quickly to my colleague, Nikki, who oversees recruiting a meteorologist for Scripps.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being a part of our webinar today. It was a pleasure having you with us. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Neil, Dennis, Aaron, Amber, and Ed for their insightful work and sharing today. I trust that our attendees are departing with valuable insights comparable to those that I have acquired today. There is such significant impact on weather all across the United States. It's evident from your sharing, your dedication, and your expertise. Not only you as meteorologists, but our colleagues here that play essential roles in keeping our communities safe and informed. As we wrap up this webinar, I'd like to take a moment to just discuss a few ways that you can stay connected with us as we value building relationships, strong journalism, and fostering a community of passionate professionals in the field of meteorology. We have two incredible opportunities in Norfolk, Virginia Beach at WTKR, where you can experience all 4 seasons plus occasional hurricanes. So a perfect weather market. We have an opportunity for an evening weekday chief meteorologist position that we're recruiting for, as well as a weekend meteorologist, MMJ, which has the opportunity to get on air with their meteorology expertise at every shift. So other opportunities that come along each year, full-time, part-time, and even temporary opportunities to join our talented meteorologist team here at Scripps. Would love to share those opportunities, and this slide shares an opportunity where you can book a 30-minute one-on-one using the QR code on screen to connect with me as a way to stay connected, as well as our Scripps career site where all of our openings are listed as well. It's a great chance to discuss your interests, learn more about your weather story, how you can contribute to our mission, and the exciting work we're doing here at Scripps. In addition to our meteorologist positions, we also have over 100 opportunities across other departments, including sales, news, creative, and engineering, just to name a few. So whether you're looking to spark your creativity, dive into innovative storytelling, or contribute to an impactful project, there's something for everyone. Again, thank you for attending today's webinar. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to connect with me. I look forward to connecting with you. Be safe and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you to everybody from our meteorologists and those of you that attended. If you missed any part of this webinar, I will be sending you guys a link to view a recording of the webinar. We're also going to post it to the Scripps YouTube page. So thank you so much for joining us.